Okay. I think we're live. Yep, perfect. Oh, hey everyone. Welcome to um, a hybrid AMA ecosystem session, although I think it was a live ecosystem session. So a little bit of a different theme today, following on from all of the exciting things that were happened leading up to Eth Denver, at Eth Denver, and following Eth Denver. So we have one of our regulars, hey Art. You guys all recognize Art. Holochain co-founder and CTO. Let me just double check. Yep, I've got your title correct. Okay, and now we also have two special guests. So we have Josh Vial, or nickname JV, who has been tracking the Holochain ecosystem for a long time. Programmer, educator, does a lot of stuff with AI. Co-founder of Inspiral, and also the creator of Code with JV. So we're going to have some great questions. And actually, JV did, and guys, that JV did a pretty amazing talk on Holochain, why Holochain's relevant from a Web 2 and Web 3 context. So it'd be very cool to give that a repost. That's one of the things now I send around when I'm introducing to Holochain for people. So that's just some pretty fantastic content he's been creating. And also Adam Bumpus, who is the co-founder of ION and a renowned climate scientist and many
Something
other
like
things.
that.
So wonderful group. Something like that. Exactly. Wonderful group. So hey everyone, we're all together in Denver 3.5 weeks ago. So great to see everyone.
Good to
You
see
too,
you.
David.
Yeah, likewise.
Okay. So before I get into the questions, especially maybe I'll bypass you and just go straight to Adam and JV. But what do you want each of you give us just like 2 or 3 minutes on your reflections from your time at Eth Denver? It could be take any form, like what you were excited about leading up to it, and what eventuated, or just coming back and 2 or 3 weeks on, what's different, or anything really. But I'd love to hear from each of you guys in no particular order. Yeah, what were your reflections from Eth Denver, and then we'll go into some of the community questions.
JV, do you want to jump in?
Sure. It's all blurring like it was a month ago, and so I find there's so many details which have faded away from the thing, and so when people mention that talk, I'm like, oh, I can't remember what I said. So it's like but my main reflections, I'd say, probably ties into the why Holochain thing for me, is that I think Holochain is like this inspiring technology, and inspiring in the way that when I work with it or think about it, I think differently and I come up with new ideas I wouldn't have before. And so I find that idea of just practical, oh, how about this now, from working with the tech is one thing. And that's cool. And there's a bunch of them in the world. But then there's just a group of lovely people. And when lovely people meets inspiring tech, that's really worthy of prioritizing to me. So that's the main thing I've got from it, because my Eth Denver experience was very Holochain centric. Didn't get out much, was at the booth, was talking to people. So it's very much reflections on the Holochain community and technology. Eth Denver itself, the other one was that, because I've been around the crypto ecosystem for a while now, and when I engage with it online, man, you see the toxic stuff and you see lots of things, and it's just like, why am I in this place again? And one of the things I also reflect on was the amount of people who showed up to the booth who were lovely people who I like talking to from all across the ecosystem. And it was just a really nice reminder that, in Web3 and the crypto ecosystem, when you go and meet people, there are some really down-to-earth, inspiring, lovely people there as well. And so that I found that invigorating in terms of like, oh yeah, I do want to pay attention to what's happening in that space and not just ignore it because of all the tokens and scams and whatever. So that was, they're probably my top two takeaways.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Josh and Adam.
Yeah, I would probably say, I definitely say I agree with JV on that entirely, on that first one, that personal note. Actually, just being there, meeting people in person who were just interested in what we were doing and coming over and saying, hey, what is this all about? Actually, it was really invigorating because the conversations were immediately to things that people cared about, that they thought were important. And people coming over, and I remember one guy talking to me, who's this super tall basketball player from the US, and he said, look, I got into crypto because of the money, but actually, this is just so interesting. This is kind of what we need to be doing. And he was super engaged. And it was just like, it was really interesting to have those conversations. And I found it completely refreshing and kind of magical, actually, the amount of people that came by the booth, the same as JB, very, very focused on what was happening at the booth, who were just really genuinely interested in what was happening, who were lovely people who wanted to build and do good things together and just have fun. Like, it was the most fun event I've ever been to for a work thing. It was just incredible. And then on the second part was kind of more making it real. For us at ION, it's been really hard to show people, actually show them exactly what it is and how to make it real, and having the bikes there and having the connection into it and showing how we are really seamlessly integrating with Holochain made a massive difference for me, being able to just talk to people about really what's happening that is real. And that was just fantastic. What an amazing outcome. And what's changed is that we've got some, yeah, the bikes, there we are. So the afterwards, lots of conversations. So I've still got a massive list to get through of people, some of which we're in touch with already, but there's so many people who are just really interested in what we're doing. We're setting up calls across the world in multiple different continents. And so I think that's been an amazing outcome, that people just want to see how we can collaborate. So really exciting.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. And Art, any reflections from you?
Uh, I- t- for me, it's just interesting how the discourse has shifted, drifted some. There was a time, the last time we actually had a booth at Eth Denver was many years ago, like 5 years ago or something like that, and it was just everybody was much more blockchain maximalist at the time, thinking blockchain is magic and is going to do everything. And I feel like now people are much more realistic in the conversation about limitations of blockchain. And you can talk pretty easily about, hey, those things you wish you could do on blockchain, and then give some examples of things we're doing in Holochain apps, like, real-time document editing, like Google Docs, or, different things like that. And it's like, you can do those things with Holochain. And that's a very easy conversation without confronting, like, no, blockchain's going to do everything. And that was a significant, like, just shift in the background conversation, not even necessarily the foreground conversation. But it also occurs to me, we just showed pictures of the bikes and all of that. It seems like we should give a little bit of an overview of the premise of what was happening in the booth, which isn't
Yeah,
exactly any of the questions.
it's coming. It's coming. Actually, I think no, stay off mute, and why don't a combination of you guys lead us into that? Because I think, like, you kind of talked a little bit about why it was important, but I mean, like, as you said, we haven't been to East Denver for a while, and I think the ecosystem's been shifting. We've been shifting. We're more mature. People are starting to deploy some very interesting, um, I think, like a bit more than experiments on Holochain. And it was a great opportunity to just both reconnect with people, um, also show and have people experience where we're at through the booth. And I guess finally, like, we have got a strong community of people in the Colorado sort of region, and having people who know and love what we're doing come and reconnect was also very powerful. But yeah, maybe JV, um, maybe you want to go through a little bit. Maybe someone can put that video back on the screen, so uh, everyone watching can build this context in their mind. And maybe JB, you want to show us a little bit about, like, what was happening at the booth, and then Adam, you can jump in after from an ION perspective and explain why it matters to ION.
Is that me kicking off?
Yeah, let's
Sure.
hang on, let me slow down a second. So if we can get the video back on the screen, um, while JV, if you want to kick off and explain, just talk us through the demo and what was going on.
Yeah, cool. So for me, the simple ideas behind the demo were showing Holochain connecting with real world data streams. So how are you plugging it into different sources of data and getting that into a Holochain application? And then how are you showing that application connecting to blockchains? In this case, I think it was Polygon and Ethereum EVM sort of thing, but it could have been any blockchain, any wallet, and just showing Holochain in the middle of that, of connecting real world data streams with on-chain systems. And that was the core premise of it. And then the idea of how do we help people understand ION and what it's doing and the renewable energy work, that combining that was where the idea came from with the bikes and the human power credits and the energy thing. So essentially we had people on exercise bikes and we had some sensors, we had some people taking photos, we had different sorts of data feeding in. And what I was doing was getting the booth people on the booth using their mobile apps, which was talking to a laptop running a Holochain agent. So it was also showing how you can start to put in like local networks and small devices. So people would show up to the booth, they'd sign into our application with token proof, which would connect the Ethereum side of it. The booth people would start to get them on the bikes and take a photo of them as a proof that someone rode this bike here. And the simple idea behind that for me was the heart of this application was how can you use a Holochain application as a place where you can store lots of data which is cheap to audit, so you can have confidence that the claims that that application makes are legitimate. So that it's not just about one source of evidence or one party saying something, it's multiple parties saying different things which you can use to basically make an assertion. And the thing which Holochain does really nicely is all the validation rules. That because you've got very fine control over what's allowed to happen in state changes in the system, then that starts to give us lots of options about like, oh, okay, who can post a photo and who can say yes to it, and how does a sensor get its stream of data? So that was I guess that's a mushy explanation of sort of the booth there.
Yeah, if I could just chime in also, I mean, the idea is tap into the data streams from the bikes of energy being generated, take a photo of the person, especially next to the screen of the summary of the energy they generated in the bike, put those things on, store those things on Holochain, a little bit like a layer 2 kind of idea, except also with storage, which people often use things like IPFS for, or things like that. And have what we were playing with there was also the concept with RAIN protocol of issuing a semi-fungible token, where the non-fungible part is the proof that is tied to you and you keep the proof, and then the fungible part goes onto an EVM chain for being able to be traded, and you are leaning on Holochain for the kind of heavy lifting of the storage of the heavy stuff, and just using the blockchain for token trading. And so that had a lot of people think, oh, Holochain's layer 2 or whatever. It's like, well, not exactly. You can use it that way, sure. You can use it for a lot of different things. But it was, to give a fun and engaging way that people could come and jump on bikes. And our booth was regularly crowded and had a lot of engagement, and people, I think, came and had fun, and so in that sense, at the very least, it was a cool gimmick for engagement.
Yeah, and it's on that. It was really fun. People were coming over, they wanted to know what was going on, and then once they were on the bikes and we were talking to them, getting down into that deep data layer was where the conversation went. And you could see them actually as they're pedaling going, they kind of got it. And it's this in the energy space, this is solving a real world problem, because when we're trying, the bikes illustrated what you could do with a solar panel. So the bikes generate electricity, same as the solar panel generates electricity. We actually had on one of the banners that Jared pulled together, here's the bike version and here's the renewable energy version. And at ION, we're deploying this right now with partners across Southeast Asia. It's real, it's actually out in the world. And what was really cool about it is we could explain that story through it. But the key bit about the Holochain is exactly as JV and Art said, is in that kind of where the data is and being easily auditable and verifiable and validated. And what's critical about that in the real world is this is still done on PDFs and Excel sheets when you're creating renewable energy certificates. It's literally people emailing PDFs to each other. And that doesn't work if we need to get to scale. And so Holochain is a perfect real application of this. And the way that it's kind of built into the token system then is we can start to create liquidity around it and change the way investments made, and then change the way people interact with it through the blockchain, but using Holochain as that core source of data. And it's just like, it just made total sense. And from an industry perspective, this is what we're, David and I are hearing from industry partners, is that this is what they need. They need absolute surety that the thing that they're buying in these, carbon or renewable energy certificates is absolutely true. Because if it's not true, they're open up for tons of liability. And so you need that direct line of sight, and Holochain provides it. It's wonderful.
Yep, completely agree. So JV, go back to you. Tell us a little bit about your experience working with Holochain to build a demo.
Super fun. I found that because I did the dev training in April with Marcus and Guillaume and so on. So it was like the last time I'd bumped into like an in-depth Holochain experience before trying to tackle this was like 9 months or something like that. And I found, so I'd forgotten all the details, like what functions and how they work, etc. But the concepts, they really stuck. And I found that it was really interesting for me to see what's the important conceptual understanding to be able to navigate, as a developer building something in Holochain. And it's not that massive. Like, it feels a bit alien when I saw it the first time. I was like, oh, never thought about things that way before. But it was easy to remember months down the track. So most of the time I found when I was like, how do I do something? It was, I could conceptualize it and do it somewhat. It felt okay. It didn't feel like I don't understand how to do this. It felt like I think I know how I want to do this. And all the challenge was like, okay, what do I need to make that happen? And that was diving into the docs and learning all those things there. So that was the main work for me, was around reading the documentation, looking at example code, trying to implement an idea in Holochain. And I found it was, so I enjoyed it. It was fun. There was definitely friction points. I found that when there's like the main path that there's a lot of documentation for, it was super smooth, super easy. And then sometimes I try and do something and it's like, not many people have told a story about that. So that was reaching out to Discord and the lovely humans I mentioned, or that was going into, it's all open source. So you can go to the source code, you can go and look at what the Holochain core team have been doing. And I found there was lots of snippets that I'd pick up from that. And again, it was really fun at ETHDenver sitting down with Arthur and just like, oh, here's how Arthur does some stuff. And it was like, wow, I never did it like that at all. I did it much harder because I just hadn't seen the experience of them. And so that was also really fun to reflect on. So I feel like some of the technical decisions I made, I wouldn't make again. They were sort of strange ones to make in the Holochain ecosystem. But there was also some which, for example, there was a real aha moment for me when I realized I could put Ethereum signatures in the validation rules of an Holochain application so that you can lock down state changes unless someone signed it with Ethereum. And then I was just like, wow, this can integrate with any chain and any wallet really easily. So if someone said, hey, let's take this demo and we want to use Solana for it, it's just like, oh yeah, that's not much work. It's really easy to do that. And so the idea of easily integrating between lots of chains was something I saw a bunch of people who showed up to the booth were quite interested in. And because they were trying to tackle like which chains am I on and how and where am I investing my technical energy, and the idea of, oh, Holochain can be in the middle and you can do stuff in there with large data and massive amounts and low latency and all those sorts of things, was like, oh, you get a bunch of this stuff you can't do in Web3, but you can integrate with any chain. So that aha moment hit about halfway, and I was really excited by when I started to do that. The other part of it for me was, how do I get users into this application? And that was always something I'd struggled to see in Holochain, was like, okay, I'm going to get them to set up an agent on their computer, etc., which is great for some users. But then when I started digging in about, okay, how can I get someone with a phone to hit a website and access this thing and then have that be, validated and secure, etc. And it was like, oh, well, I've got the integrate with any wallet thing. But then I think the work of saying get people to validate in different ways, where you can have people like, how would I have someone validate it through an OAuth thing or an email thing? And that's where I also really like the Holochain, like, well, okay, you can give some agents certain rights that not every other ones have. So you can start to do sort of delegated roles to individual parts of the system. And I found that that also hit for me one of the big foundational principles, that the way I think about Holochain is that as a developer, you have a wide spectrum of design choices. It's not like the architects have locked it down a long way for you. And a lot of the on-chain things, the way they're designed, they've limited what I can do quite a lot. Like, there's no way I'm going to put video on Ethereum because it's just, no, it just doesn't work with this design. But Holochain lets me do video if I want. It also lets me do like really tight global state if I want, and I can make that choice. So I've got a wide range of expressivity. And so that was another thing I started to realize, like, oh yeah, if I want people to integrate with standard email magic links or OAuth stuff, I can imagine how to build that in Holochain. I didn't do it in this application, but having that option as well as on-chain things. So this is what I mean by the tech being inspiring, because it's not like it's magic tech and it does everything, not that kind of word of inspiring, but more that by using it and building with it, I started to have ideas and use cases which I hadn't thought about before. And I was like, and for me, one of the big takeaways of all this experience was, because my day work is mostly consulting with small businesses about AI. And I was like, okay, when's this ever going to fit? But I had some client calls yesterday and I was like, here's how I can imagine a Holochain application adding value to this customer. And that was because of just seeing the tech and being close to it. And so that was really exciting for me as well.
That's cool. Yeah, actually, a bit of a shout out again, JV, to what you're describing. We put out a post for NOR, and if anyone wants to participate in the tournament, there's about 30 people. If there's about 4 or 5 slots, I think, left for those in the ecosystem if they want to come in and have a play and have a look at exactly that. It's essentially people using a Holochain powered platform hosted by Holo to connect the information across different blockchains, as well as to connect into different game networks like Steam and other places, and store this like rich data held by the player that's plugging into the NOR platform. It's very, very, very cool. And Euphorica as well are going to show something in their version of being able to span across different blockchains. So two very interesting games, and I think a lot of other games that are looking for this kind of pattern because they're not sure which blockchain to choose. Because actually, what they don't want at the heart is a blockchain. What they want at the heart is player data and the understanding who the player is, player's expression through identity, and then they want to connect into different assets in different places and bring an asset into a game or move an asset here. But the asset isn't the primary thing. The primary thing is the agent, and that's, I mean, so that's, I think, yeah, that lines up, JV, with what you were describing. The other thing to reflect on is a little bit is we do have to, at least for those of you who've been tracking for a number of years, we have to feel for art, because I feel like art is going to have at least a decade of his life watching people implement design patterns that he knows should have been implemented in a way more simple fashion. But he's still got the patience. When I first started working with art, I thought, like, what's going on? Like, can't he just explain to people up front and like get them like short circuit all of this? But I think like one of the beauties is his capacity to actually allow people to get stuck in those patterns and then have the breakthrough, because then you have embodied experience of what's different, and that's actually a critical part of this phase. But it is funny every time I hear that. Anyway, sorry for going off topic there.
I don't want people to be stuck, but it's just people cross the thresholds when they do, it's.
Yeah. I think it's also that time spent together talking and working through it. This is one of the things that really came out of Eth Denver as well. Like, just even JV, you and I, and I'm not on the technical side, but we sat and we talked and we worked through things and we tried to figure it out. And we're still trying to do that, but it's really about taking that time, and then it becomes more elegant. But exactly as you were saying, David, then on the games, it's the same thing in energy. Multiple different technologies, multiple different use cases, multiple different environments, from sub-Saharan Africa to Southeast Asia. They all have their different flavors, and we need a system that can account for that and be locally appropriate. Otherwise, it doesn't work. So it's a very similar thing. We need to know what the things are. We need to know what the data is. We need to be able to share that seamlessly and quickly.
Yeah, we know from all the conversations with PV blocks, and I was just chatting to some guy, like chatting around the carbon markets with some of like large carbon market operators. I mean, in both of those worlds, essentially Holochain's power to deliver, like, let's call it like verified data streams, actually will give rise to the true existence of those markets. Without that, those markets are just they're fraudulent markets ultimately, and and so we've got this crazy scenario, don't we, where we have like the world moving towards wanting these markets in place, but almost knowing that they're fraudulent and not knowing how to deal with that. And what we're sitting on is the beginnings of like one of the critical solution components to that. I think that came up a little bit. I mean, ideally, as what we do with the bikes progress from a holochain perspective, from an ION perspective, and also from Rainland perspective, then it'll get tighter and tighter, and people will see that complete integration and and have those moments of realizing like that experience of the future when they can start to see, okay, hang on, I can verify what was happening on the bike, and I can see this in a peer-to-peer like OTC marketplace. And then I can go and I can only put trades for assets that have this level of data verification. And while we're there, technically with each of the pieces, we I think like one of the things with the demo is an amazing first step to what will continue to be a showcase and get better and better and better. And then the showcase will go into production, and then that'll start to become the reality in energy grids leading into different markets. So yeah, very, very exciting first step. Well, I think I just answered the next question actually. How do you think this pattern of verifiable data might be used in other industries outside of renewable energy? But Art, you're also saying, I think you're having a bit of a real world asset conversation right now.
Yeah, exactly. I'm right now. I am in Nevada City, California, in my camper, parked at a guy's house that has a bunch of gold mines, and he actually wants to create a gold-backed currency, but where the way it's structured is you prove the presence of the gold. You take any of the stuff that is like super easy to extract without doing much damage, but that you actually continue to own the mining rights and the land and that kind of thing. But you're creating a gold-backed currency by gold that's in the ground. Because if you think about what we do right now, we take gold out of the ground with very destructive processes. And what happens to it? Largely, it goes back into a vault in the ground, right? Take it from one hole in the ground to another, but we destroy a lot of the planet in the process, and we have enough gold sitting in vaults right now. So what if we lower the percentage of the gold that's being backed, because at some point maybe it will have to be extracted, but maybe it doesn't have to be extracted. Maybe you can create other models for the maintenance of revenues of the land with tree banking and with other, environmental ecosystem production of the land, essentially, and have that be part of the value, but have being able to tokenize the rights on the gold as still tokens backed by gold. And he's got some pretty elaborate processes for it, but basically the idea is there's a few different ways that you can back this. Some of them could be fully insured, some of them could be even qualify as Section 1031 real estate investments, and all sorts of different things like that. But similar to like what we did with the bikes, where you've got the proof, the non-fungible part sitting on Holochain, being well documented, having been signed into an immutable record, all that kind of stuff. And then you could have a fungible part of the token that goes into the markets and that kind of thing. All of those tokens can be backed by proofs of the rights. And so this is just one of the many ways that you could do real world assets. And I want to also say that when I talk about real world assets, I don't always mean it in the way that typical accounting is used. Like for ION and even for Holofuel, we're not talking about the solar panel as the asset that's backing the currency in this case, but the energy, the kilowatts that it produces, or not talking about the hosting box as the asset, but the hosting power that it produces. And so if you want to make a currency backed by real world assets, you can do that with like an Uber like drivers cooperative that's got a driver's credit currency, and it's backed by rides, not by cars, and it's still real world, tangible, measurable, provable assets that are different than a currency that's just a speculative thing, not backed by any value. And so I just want to point to that we can we can measure, we can record the physical assets like deeds and titles and, grams of gold per meter in a section of a plot of land, or, that kind of thing. But we can also record the flows of productivity as a type of asset. And both of those are valuable ways of relating to real world assets.
And that's a great point on, no one really buys a solar panel, they buy the electricity that comes from it. It's the solar panel is just the thing that does it. The asset is actually the thing that the productivity that comes from it. It's like no one actually cares. I just want my lights to work. So it's a great way of thinking about it.
Yeah, completely agree. And actually, one of the things that came up a lot at Denver was the cost of Uber. And if you chatted to Uber drivers at Denver, that Uber drivers are getting 20 to 40% of their fare. So yeah, I got into some really interesting conversations with people at Eth Denver over those kind of issues, and people getting excited about one or two different ride sharing apps on Solana. I was like, this is fine. But yeah, ultimately, we can see where it's going. Where we're able to support groups of drivers, coordinate, as well as start to power productive feedback currencies. It seems almost an inevitability. Is the current system, rent seeking in the system, that says that their coordination layer of Uber is worth what, 60 to 80%, and the driving is worth 20 to 40%, seems like it at least should be inverted, even if not pushed higher. And actually, what's going to be really interesting is when it does get pushed higher, we can see how those coordination system breaks and what a healthy equilibrium point would be, which we frankly just don't know. But I didn't meet a driver that was like, oh, this is absolutely awesome. The value I'm getting from Uber, I'm so happy about that. I'm really grateful to be, and excited about what I'm doing. They're like, look, this is really crappy. And actually, if I could peer to peer be interacting right now with my customer base and doubling what I'm getting per ride, I'd be in a much better place. I thought like that was a very, very interesting real world application of the things that we're pointing to. And while we were doing a showcase that was, had a lot of pieces with people riding through the assets, through the trading, and a little bit clunky in how it was all fitting together, and we didn't get end to end. At the same time, we're watching an opportunity of the industry that's massively ready for what we're bringing to market. So yeah, yeah, I think that was the other cool thing, huh? That like I know a lot of these guys were at the store, whereas I was moving around a little bit. And in moving around, you could almost see the mirrors of what we were showcasing in the booth manifest in the physical reality of what was happening around Denver, with the Uber being a perfect example. That was actually for me the most inspiring conversation that I had was with these Uber drivers, and starting to see like what the real opportunities are for these, like for Holo, and what that looks like for people's, for people's compute, and for what that looks like for what that looks like for driving, what that looks like for small scale energy generation. What about for you guys? What was the really inspiring conversation that you guys had? And if you didn't have one that really stood out, that's fine. If you had one, jump in and share what that was.
I've got a reflection on what you're saying about Uber first, around, I think that like the story of Uber, where it's like, okay, a driver is being picky about their rides, so they're going to give them a really sweet deal and give them a lot of money for their first ride to get them hooked, and then they're going to slowly lower it, like algorithmically manipulating how much they pay people. Cory Doctorow's got an article about that yesterday, and the story of like AWS, Amazon, like anywhere there's a big monopoly, it just starts to get a worse and worse deal for everyone involved. And that to me is the promise of the decentralized computing world. Like, yeah, it's great to have a monopoly as long as it's run transparently and everyone owns it and can govern it. Otherwise, it's just going to be this point of extraction. And I think the trick of all that is like, okay, how do you practically compete with those embedded players? Like, how different do you need to be? What's the edge in? And because if you can get up to a similar scale, you can just be tons cheaper than them by just not extracting as much. So I think that there's a long-term competitive advantage for these transparent, decentralized, platform co-op governed sort of ideas. And the trick from going to zero to competing at scale is the hard part. And there's lots of little ideas there, but I think that's probably the call to action for anyone interested in decentralized computing, is to contribute to that stuff and to think about how could you actually get something at the scale of Uber or AWS. And that's why, Holo hosting and tackling the hosting thing of, they've got fat margins. They're extracting from everyone, and it's a tough game to get up to there. But if you can do it, it's very compelling for value creation for the world.
Yeah, well, what's pretty interesting, JV, that you're showcasing, like with the verifiable credentials, for example, is we can use, like, someone could create an app that uses existing credentials, and so you're not dealing with all sides of the problem, are you then? Like, and so then you can imagine a sort of the credentialing world interfacing with the distribution world. So you don't have to spin everything up. Anyway, it's super interesting. All right. So what was your, JB, especially? I mean, you have locked in a ton of conversations. Was there a single most inspiring topic or moment for you?
Probably not a single most. I'd say, like, for me, hanging out with Art for like 5 days, and just all the little conversations and the gentle rolling of eyes at my technical choices. I wouldn't say that it was, but it was like there were a bunch of times where I'd like dug myself into a hole and I was like, okay, let's think about something different. And that was just like lots of pieces of inspiration. Just thinking about currency, thinking about technology, thinking about the potential of this direction, and realizing, Holochain is the first steps in a direction, and that direction has got lots of steps in front of it and could be very different to what I was imagining as possible with computing. I would say that also being the booth, the people showing up with their different ideas and how random they were. Like, there was a fellow who was talking about wanting to do stuff with frisbee golf, and how many frisbee golf clubs there are and how they organize their tickets and things. Like, I'd never thought about that as a problem or as a size. And so the real world things people were trying to do, I found was really inspiring. Like, there was a DAO there, Arrow DAO, who were doing like an open source flying car, and they were on to like version 2 of their prototype. They got FDA, approval on the works. They were going towards their real flying vehicle soon. They funded a factory in Turkey, and someone in Berlin was doing a bunch of it. And the main guy had his was in Texas, I think, where he was assembling the final devices. And so it was just like, oh yeah, individuals are trying to do an open source flying car in the DAO space. Was just that kind of thing was I found really exciting. And then and also the individual people who are doing stuff in sort of like the AI space. And it felt like it was so much, there was a lot of stuff around like, AI and blockchain and decentralized things, which I didn't see a huge amount of substance. It was just like, there's words and people are running at the words. But then I bumped into a few people who were like doing stuff that felt really interesting. And the potential and what are the use cases in that area is something I'm still really digesting. So that was more of like, pointers to something inspiring rather than like directly inspiring conversations, would be my sense of it.
I had a really cool one, just building on that kind of, the sort of random conversations. I was talking to two people, I had never met them before, and there was a guy and a girl, and we're talking, and we're just talking about the booth, blah blah blah, and the guy's like, wait a second, and we just went through it, and he's like, so what you're doing is this, and this, and he by his self-admission was a pure crypto guy. He was so excited, and he just talked about the energy problem, and he repeated it like perfectly. It was just, he got it immediately. And then the person who sat next to, we had no idea, she worked for a power utility, and she said, oh, I get it. Oh, this is interesting. And so suddenly we had this conversation we've been trying to have for 5 years. Suddenly came to fruition with these two people who've never met before, and it all made complete sense. And I just sort of stepped back, and these guys just talked together, and it was just wonderful because it just then became super real. And that for me was a really inspiring moment, because they were both, I think from their technical level, it made sense, but also from a human level, they were both just so open to figuring it out and trying to figure out and understand it. And that for me was one of the biggest, that for me was a real moment, because it just, it wasn't just about the technicality, it's about us trying to build something different and do something different. And that extractive layer that we've seen, things like Uber, we see that time and time and time and time again in the energy world. And energy, access to clean, accessible, affordable electricity is a human right, just as basically internet access is, right? And so we got to change that. So I think that was it was just such a fascinating and inspiring moment to be there and have that conversation. And now that conversation is still going on. So I'm really happy to be part of it. And the other part was, I think, just being there. And as JV said, the kind of random ideas. Someone came over, we started chatting with a guy, and he runs Bitcoin mining in Texas based off stranded gas assets. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. And so we just got into like, how could we do this on like post gas? Like, how could we do it on clean energy and these massive kind of containers on this weird wasteland? And it was just an interesting, like, okay, these are the conversations that will in 5 years' time be real projects or real, at least more real use cases. So I love that.
Yeah. For me, definitely part of the fun was hanging out with JV and being tech support and errand boy, picking up electronic parts and, different stuff like that. Because it's not that often that I get to work on just the like hands-on, let's solder some stuff onto a, Raspberry Pi Zero and, all that kind of stuff. And so that was fun. But one of the strange things was that we had a conversation that I often don't have about some of the fundamental ontological differences between like holochain and blockchain and why we start from a different ground of being, assumptions of ground of being. And it proved to be a very fruitful conversation with JV. And so I started testing it some at ETHDenver, and I've kind of abandoned this conversation because normally it's not very fruitful. But there were a few people for whom it just really seemed to pop something. And it makes me think, David, of the thing that you were saying a little bit ago about all of this energy generation, or like talking about markets on top of things that need verified data sources, and how without something like holochain, it's essentially all bullshit data. Like it's not provable data. And that's pointing to this fundamental flip, that essentially the idea that data has independent truth is already a fraud, right? You've basically already lost data integrity if you don't know where the data came from. Tokens don't just exist. Data doesn't just exist. They're created by or asserted by an agent. And if you lose the provenance, if you aren't having this all be rooted in provenance, which is the way Holochain does it, then you have built your physics around having to have global state and global consensus and absolute time and all of then the bottleneck problems that are built into blockchain, where if you build it around agency, you don't end up with the same physics and limitations. And people were starting to get that. And so maybe the wind is shifting, and this is a conversation people can start to hear. But there's a way in which I would say all of blockchain land and things like the Oracle problem and all that only exist, like all of the limitations that because of starting from that assumption. And for me, one of the exciting things was, how you were talking about sometimes you watch me try to have conversations to have people shift where they're coming from, and it doesn't happen until whenever it does, right? And it was happening much more quickly in terms of like people being able to fundamentally shift the ground of being, the assumptions that these things are built on, and they could understand the advantages of starting from different assumptions. And that hasn't usually been a fruitful conversation.
Yep. Yeah, it makes sense. And I think that by taking this angle, I think like when people are thinking, when people are asking the question of holochain adoption, as Art just described, what should happen in even like a relatively inefficient market, but certainly an efficient market, is that, so let's just take the carbon markets in 18 months' time. You have a series of assets that are high quality that have this, like, let's just call it like verified data stream. And then you have almost every asset that doesn't. And where's liquidity going to go? And then what? So for any asset that then wants liquidity, why would liquidity go when there's an asset that has a quality asset that has a verified data stream and equivalent quality asset that doesn't? Why would any capital go to any of those other assets? And so,
Now
like,
take that a step further to general web content. Why
exactly.
are people paying attention to unverified sources of, you really go to a place where what we want is a verified web, an authenticated web. Why do we have unauthenticated data at all? Like, really, don't we need to be fixing this problem at a pretty fundamental layer in how we approach things?
Exactly. So, yeah, I mean, I think again, for those watching, like, that's one of the things that we're tying with our adoption strategy. The point isn't that you need to focus on everything everywhere. It's that you need to focus on those real, like that real apex, the critical things that drive markets or behavior. And in terms of verified data stream, at least a hypothesis, and like Adam and I know this a lot with the ION and the conversation with the PV blocks. Like, yes, you can do renewable energy credits and all this stuff, but unless you have this verified data stream, you're not going to get a liquid market for renewable energy credits off the ground, right? Just because there's actually, you just genuinely can't. So again, any market that's trading right now is trading off a whole bunch of bureaucracy and inefficiency, whereas this starts to completely transform the way the market can work. Anyway, so I guess, like, obviously we're excited, and I'm excited because I keep going on about it. All right, so let me go into a few community questions before we close up in 13 minutes. So how far away is the prototype idea? So this for you. So for the ION by itself, how far away is the prototype idea and concept from being connected, e.g. solar panels or other forms of energy? Are there proof of concepts within a certain neighborhood or area running? And if not running already, are they planned?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we have our commercial partners rolling this out right now. The tech is running. We have the first credits being minted very shortly. So like it's out there, it's running now. So it's that kind of early stage of commercial adoption. So it's not widespread right now, but actually the prototype works. It is in other people's hands. We have our third-party customers using it. So that's really good. We don't have a certain neighborhood right now, but those partners are working on those neighborhoods in certain areas, but they're also working on corporate partners. And this goes back to what you said just then, Art, in terms of the ontology of this, is that large corporate partners, because they've been burned with bad data associated with credits and other things they're trying to commoditize and actually rely on financial data for, they've been burned by the markets because the markets have been so bad. And so that ontology is shifting for them to think, this little thin layer of data on the top that someone's created doesn't work for me. I need to have a really deep understanding of the agent-based approach. And what they say is just data, but actually the agent's providing the data that's really critical. So yeah, look, it's not a proof of concept, it's an actual commercial product that's rolling out right now. And that is an ION. That's our first stage of 3. First one is, is get these renewable energy certificates out and running with partners. The second stage is more embedding of the Holochain agent into other technology partners so that we can get that first principles actual data happening. And the third part is full microgrid transactions running through Holochain and ION. And all of those projects and business development we're doing are happening in parallel. But the first stage is actually out there in the wild right now.
Awesome, thank you. And Adam, I guess one for you as well, based on JB, the work he was doing, how could anyone, including government officials, be assured that the data sets generated can be mapped in a logical way to create a sense of confidence about its accuracy, especially people with no technical know-how? And how would we demonstrate that in real time? And I wonder, someone was also saying, how could you describe the different data sources layered together to build verifiable systems, which JB, I know you did with your different point perspective on the bikes. But yeah, so basically, essentially what they're asking is, how can we build confidence in the accuracy of data?
Maybe I'll just do quickly on the government bit, and then JV on the kind of the core data bit. The government part is right now, anyone who's issuing renewable energy certificates is basically looking at PDFs and Excel sheets of outputs of data from people's meters. So it's very super easily to change, to doctor, but I mean, most people are not faking it, but it's just super inefficient, makes no sense. And so what they can see through this system is if there is an audit that takes place on a set of renewable energy assets and a government agency says, I want to audit this and spot audit, this is what all third-party auditors do. And they just basically click down, dive, and then they can see, for example, in the PV blocks example, they can see a satellite image from space of the solar panels on the person's roof. They can see a photograph from the ground of the solar panels on that person's roof, and they can see an actual API meter reading of the solar panels at that point in time in that location. And so that's still, we can get better. We can definitely use more data points to make that more specific, but that is pretty good. And so what that means now is, because it's all ledger, because it's all stamped, and we can understand cryptographically that this was the real data at that real point in time, it gives assurance to those government entities. And this is a direct quote that they need direct line of sight to that data. And that's basically what it provides straight away.
And for me, it's a little bit like how many people have gone and read the Bitcoin source code, but how many people trust it. It's that you need the ability to audit it, and you need a large number of people to audit it independently. And if you have that ability, you can get a high level of trust in something. And the fact that you can build a Holochain application, you can open source it, it can be transparent, like the code itself can be audited, and people can prove that that is the code people are running because of the way Holochain works naturally. If you're running different code, it won't be talking to each other. So I think you get a direct confidence that the code that's been written is the code that's being executed. And then you can interrogate the data the same way you'd interrogate the open source code, is that people can, and again, you need some technical proficiency to do it at a raw level, or you can use an interface that someone you trust has been built, and you can do it the way that Adam was talking about government officials, like clicking on a web application, going down, seeing stuff, and the application telling them things about it which they believe and trust. And I think because all of it is directly auditable and transparent, that you can have the fact that anyone can do it, I think that's great. That's the starting point. The next thing for me is, like, how do you make it cheap for people to do it? Because I think if you make it cheaper and cheaper for people to audit, and you have audits more frequently, then I think you can have more trust in the system. And that idea of what Arthur was talking about with, like, the provenance and the data things, like, this is directly relevant in the AI world, where all of the work in AI systems, it's the data. It's like, if you want to fine tune an open model, yeah, I can show you 100 lines of code. You can do it really quickly. All your work is going to be about curating, finding, tweaking the data, and about measuring the outputs of different setups. And it's like your evaluation and your data stuff is where the cost is in AI systems in particular. And with the impact that's going to have in the world, I think this data thing, the provenance and quality of data, the value of that is going up day by day, let alone what Adam was talking about of, like, oh yeah, those big official government recs, people emailing PDFs and Excel spreadsheets to each other, and then someone gets paid to go and audit that slowly, and phone calls and physical inspections. Like, we can beat that. It's easy to manage a more efficient and effective auditing system for multiple domains. And for me, it's a little bit like the thought that maybe it's going to be the insurance companies which drive the climate change response. Like, maybe that's going to be the sector of society which has the signal to really move lots of things. Makes me wonder about the role of auditors in moving towards an open web. And that actually, who is it who wants audit, pays for audit, does audit? Maybe they're the people to really focus on as a leverage point, which could have a very outsized impact in terms of moving lots of closed and efficient systems to open, transparent, auditable systems. And the final thing for me about that I love about the Holochain world is that it doesn't mean that anyone on the internet can go and click buttons and see that data. You can have very fine-grained control over who gets to see it, when they see it, how that works through, like, membranes around applications or around private source chains. And again, having that flexibility to choose between it means I think there's very few audit or data problems we couldn't tackle with this technology. Even if you want to do super lockdown secure stuff, there's ways you could use this technology for it. And if you want to do anyone in the world can click on a website and have a view of something and drill down themselves, and, like, open source auditors, etc., you can build that too. And they can coexist together in an ecosystem, because you can bridge between those applications. That's a very broad spectrum of capability. So I'm personally interested in auditors and AI data as things to chew on over this year.
Just on that auditing bit, JV, just super quickly, that's actually, it's a critical moment for us to look at, because I'm doing some work with an organization who is trying to improve the frequency of micro auditing for carbon projects across Southeast Asia and actually in East Timor. And the reason they're doing that is they want to get more cash back into the people who are running those projects faster. And what tends to happen is the audit's expensive, it only happens every 5 years. And so there is a massive cash deficit for those people who are actually dealing with the problem. And so if we can use these deeper layers and have those correct parameters of who can audit it when, give the auditors and the standards more confidence that it's real, they can start issuing credits and cash more regularly and help the people who are actually on the ground doing the work. It's absolutely critical. It's a great locus for us to look at.
Just bouncing off that, one of the inspiring conversations I had with Arthur was around it made me think about, when is the role of creating a currency? When would you actually do that? And the idea that there is a potential in a community that is not being activated because they don't have a currency to interact with each other. It's like, oh, if we don't have any access to money, we can't buy and sell each other services, is a really good use case for creating a currency to unlock that human potential. And when you're talking about the East Timor thing, it's like, oh, what's the potential across the world for good work? Whether it's energy work, environmental work, when is that not being unlocked because the financial flows are not going there? And maybe you don't need to create a currency, you just need to plug it into another financial flow and reduce the friction. Then you can unlock potential. Seems like a nice mental model.
Yeah, well, it's definitely been. Oh, sorry, go.
I was going to say, it was making me think of like real-time auditability, where you want to be sure that the data feed that you're getting is actually, or the data feed the auditor is looking at is the actual data feed. And you take this piece of cardboard and you hold it over the solar panel and you see if the data feed shows dropped energy, and you could make sure that you're actually seeing the like I know that may be an extreme case, but
no, but it can be as simple as that. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think I'm gonna wrap up there. Is it a great conversation? Any final thoughts from any of you guys?
I don't know. I mean, I want to thank JV for all of the work that he put into the booth and putting all that stuff together, and because I think it was fun and engaging and really created a worthwhile experience around that to engage people with, and Adam for being there and helping with the conversations. And yeah, it was fun. We had a good booth team. It was actually really great, David, having Buddy there as well. Like he couldn't have the technical conversations, but he was fun, and engaging. And then he'd know who to pass people to when they wanted to get questions answered that he couldn't answer. And while we're at it, I just want to also thank Stephen Morris, who's not on the call, but was super valuable in running all the production of the booth and just taking care of everyone and making sure all the boxes were ticked. And yeah.
Yeah, agree. It was great. Yeah, we should be doing something exciting in Singapore, Token 2049 there in September.
I think
But
Mary
yeah,
made a promise to the Zebu Live people who came by the booth that we would
in
also
October.
do a
Yep,
bike thing there in October.
that's right. Lucas and I are talking to a bike company mid-April, trying to get the bike stuff organized a little more in advance. But yeah, I think like the really there's some three very, very interesting threads, aren't there, that we covered that we're going to be talking about a lot more. And I think like the first of this like real world asset verified data streams, and I've just been thinking in my mind as we've been chatting, it's weird, isn't it? Because like in a blockchain sense, you talk about the real world asset or the off-chain asset as the thing that happens outside the blockchain. And that's a little bit like with the Null platform as well. And like why games and game platforms and social apps and everything are always having this trouble, because they're like, but the key stuff can't happen outside the blockchain. It has to happen with all of the participants, with all the agents. And Holochain flips the perspective and says that we're creating value, and what we're doing is connecting in to that value, then that value is created by us and how we're working together. And just that simple shift, but then the demand for verified data, the demand for across web apps, across AI, across financial markets, I think is a really, really, really interesting and exciting theme for us, alongside the focus to showing like the edge compute network, like Holo, being able to do coordination of compute and then what that might mean. So I think we're in a really, really, really exciting year. Denver suddenly kicked off a ton of conversations that you guys all talked about. It also showcased a level of maturity, and that will build across 2024. And look forward to very great year, some good stuff in Singapore. But probably it'd be great to have another conversation like this with you guys, whether it's post Singapore or sometime in between, like where some of these reflections and thoughts have started to go and what's built off the back of it in 5 or 6 months. I'm going to close, except Art is going to say something before we close.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's the right thing to throw in right now, but here I am doing it. That living systems wealth diagram, the deep wealth levels of wealth diagram.
Yep.
It's like the blockchain space has focused on the speculative wealth, the betting market, the poker chips, and that's what blockchains facilitate. And we're focusing on the wealth that's actually part of the living system, right? What are the flows that are happening in the system? And sure, you can also make a derivative betting market on those flows if you want, but we can't be disconnected from the real flows and act like the real thing is the betting market. The betting market's disconnected from the living system. That's a different thing. And yeah, exactly. So the living system here being the water and that kind of thing, and the dock being separate from that's where blockchain has focused its work, and we're with Holochain trying to enable the connection to the flows at all these other levels, because that's actually what we care about if we want to support the living system, our environment, our communities, our businesses, which are living systems, and the planet being alive. We have to actually be connected to the real flows, not just the gambling chips where you bet on the flows.
Here. Absolutely. Thank you all. And thank you, JV. And thank you all of you. It's been a fantastic experience to be part of this from the very beginning. And that comment you just made, Art, is why I personally am still here. It's exactly right. Thank you. Thank you both.
Perfect. On that note, JV, Adam, Art, everyone who was involved in Denver, as you say, Stephen, Buddy, the team pulling this together, thank you guys so much. And yeah, look forward to talking to you soon. We should have an AMA coming up sometime mid-April or so, I believe, or late April. So look forward to seeing you all then.
Thanks, David.
Yeah, thank you. It's lovely.
Thanks, you guys.